On the show today, we have Dr. Taylor Burrowes. She is an expert with relationships. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Evan.
By the way, what part of the country are you in?
I'm in Miami.
You're
So
Miami.
for the time being, yeah, I'm not sure how long I'm going to be here, but I'll be here for at least a few weeks.
Is that where you're from originally?
No, I'm from the Cayman Islands, just moved to the States again,
Wow.
the end of May. So my mother lives here.
Okay, cool. So you have over 14 years of clinical mental health and marriage and family experience. And with that in mind, since you've counseled lots of people, what do you think is an ideal life, and what is the kind of life that people should aim for?
Well, that's different for everybody because it depends on your personality and what you define as important to you, what your priorities are and your values are. So really it's something that I work on with clients in order to figure out what it is that they're striving for and maybe clarify what makes them feel fulfilled. Like it's kind of just, at the end of your days or at the end of literally at the end of the day when you put your head on the pillow or at the end of your life, what will you be proud of? What are you going to look back and say, you know what, I made the best use of my time and I really lived well and I couldn't have done it any better?
Okay, so it really depends on what people are really aiming for. But I mean, how do people avoid toxic relationships? Because I think this kind of helps and aids in having an ideal life, right?
Yeah, what I like to use is a little formula that I came up with, and that's why I focus on ideal because it's a standard that you strive for. Obviously, we can't reach perfection, nor would we really want to, but it's a horizon that you should be walking toward and working on every day. So, in a sense, that's what the ideal means, and developing yourself in an ideal way, attracting your ideal partner, and then developing this ideal life that I talk about. So toxic relationships are absolutely, they're going to be major hurdles and obstacles along the way, but they're usually reflective of challenges that you're having internally. Like if you're having any kind of residual problems or issues that you need to sort through, dysfunctions, distress, maybe old wounds, then that's going to come out. I mean, there's a few things that you can do to really grow. Relationships are one of them. So people will put themselves in a situation that's pretty toxic, really because they're trying to correct some of these distorted experiences that maybe they had in the past. And that's definitely not always the best way to sort through your baggage.
And right, so I mean, so I'm assuming there's people who do want to avoid toxic relationships, and they have worked on themselves, and they have fixed origin of family traumas, but then they meet someone who, in a way, has a mask, and it's kind of a fake, and during the relationship, everything is fine for the first maybe 6 months to a year, and then they drop that mask, and in reality, they're like narcissistic or predatory people. How can people avoid that kind of stuff?
Well, if you're talking about people who have clinical levels of dysfunction, like that's going to be a different subset. So if we're talking about literally narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, who are more people who are more predatory, whether consciously or not, that's few and far between for the most part. A lot of people use the term narcissist quite loosely, so we have to be careful with that. And oftentimes it's misused. It's applied when it really just means. The person is kind of bossy, or they're very particular, they like their way, or maybe they're moody and they get pretty disheveled when things don't go their way. And so it's sometimes more of what I like to call it's the relationship might have the disease and not the
Oh,
particular
interesting.
person, right? So that's one way to externalize the issue, because you put that person with somebody else and they'd have a completely different, sort of appearance. They look fine, but it was that dynamic.
Okay. And, I mean, what do you think about the idea that people say that you kind of bring yourself into the relationship, though, too, into any relationship? So if you had a toxic
Yeah.
relationship in the past and you go with someone who's not toxic, but you still kind of bring those wounds, even though it's not as toxic as the one prior to that, it's still something's added to that mix, right?
Well, sure. I don't want to make it sound like people ask for these situations. I mean, a lot of it is subconscious material that's happening and playing out in our lives. And there definitely are cases where people accidentally end up in a toxic situation, whether a relationship or just life circumstance in general. And so when that happens, it should be easy to spot if you have done the work for yourself. If you have really clear boundaries and standards, values, belief systems, vision, you're not really going to let somebody derail you to the extent that someone like that may. I mean, usually bringing kids into the picture is what complicates matters, because then you're thinking about somebody else, right, and the benefit of, do I stay with the person and try to contain the situation, or do I, irritate them even more, right, and not even have any proximity in taking care of the children, and then they have full reins. So a lot of people will just play damage control in that situation, stay and try to contain it, which is understandable. But if there are no other sort of things playing in the mix, then a lot of times people who are healthy would say, okay, this is erratic, terrible behavior that I'm not going to allow in my life, and walk away. But if we're talking about domestic violence, that's also a different scenario. So we have to kind of clarify what level of dysfunction we're referring to.
I know, going back to what you said earlier, is like lots of people easily classify anyone they dislike as narcissistic or whatever. But, and they have to be clinically diagnosed. But for people who are out there in the wild, per se, engaging in these different relationships, trying to find the right one, they're not experts in diagnosing people or anything. I mean, what are the kind of tools they can use as an amateur? I mean, obviously they can't take everyone they date into like a clinical psychologist and have them validate or anything. So what can they use like out in the wild?
Well, your intuition is the best tool that you have. So you should absolutely be trying to use that on a regular basis. And it starts with very small things, and you just learn to trust your gut. But you can kind of tell the hair on the back of your neck, as sort of visual as that is, and it's real. Like, you kind of have this guttural response to things that are really, they're uncomfortable, they don't make sense, they feel icky. And so you have to really pay attention to that feeling. And I have been teaching that to even little children for the longest time in regards to avoiding child abuse, right? Or whether it's familial or a stranger that's trying to target them. You really have to use that and trust it. And a lot of times people they dismiss the signs. And if you're wondering that you should take your potential partner into a psychologist to get them tested, that's usually a good sign that something is wrong. So I would take a step back and do some serious vetting at that point.
Okay. And do you recommend marriage for young boys, especially how the divorce rates are skyrocketing and the climate in family courts, and when it comes to the custody and all this kind of stuff? Do you still think it's a great idea as a relationship coach?
Well, I do believe that family values are extremely important, and the idea of a healthy marriage is very beneficial. I mean, just developing oneself as a human being to the level that, you have that attachment and intimacy with an intimate partner, and you build something, really special together in regards to creating a household and a family and a legacy. And the values that are entrenched in that are what protect people in developing themselves as a healthy individual. And it models them on, healthy relationships and discipline and work ethic and, what's good and what's bad and evil, and all of those really important morals that should be coming from the home. But I mean, we're not even talking about that. We're just talking about the actual ceremony of marriage and the institution of it, and how it's been eroded because of these civil matters and the legal issues involved. And I absolutely agree that it is a bad, dysfunctional state of affairs, the way that it's being used against the men in a lot of situations. I mean, obviously there's, and sometimes women, but we used to see a lot of women stuck in these toxic environments and abusive environments, and they didn't feel empowered to leave the home with anything to survive with. And so we've overcorrected now and are more punitive towards men that are not doing anything wrong. And so we need to make sure that there is a more just and fair system, but also we need to encourage people to honor the intention of marriage. Right. And that we've lost that. So I think we need to get back to that, make divorce probably easier and make getting married harder.
Right, because I know in Sweden, I believe that is, I might have the wrong country, but I know that if you get divorced, nobody gets anything, and there isn't a money windfall, and so divorce rates are pretty much non-existent there. There should be definitely changes in the law to remove the incentive to do those kinds of things. On this subject, why do you think divorce rates are so high?
Well, I think that people are marrying the wrong person. And that's why I focus so much of my work on the vetting process, because people just don't know how to date. They're too impulsive, they're too dependent, they're too needy, they're not able to regulate their own emotions. So they really just latch on to the first option that they get. And especially now with the sort of delayed timeline of women not marrying or having children until way into their late 30s, that's sort of contributing to the problem, because then the desperation sets in. They realize that time is running out and they'll just marry, the first sort of viable option. And then that usually ends up in a divorce. Right. So, that's just one scenario. There's lots of other reasons. But ultimately, in every situation where I've done marital therapy with a couple who ended up divorcing, it was because they came so late into the room to work on the problems, but they just married a person that was incompatible with them. So my three components of that are desire, logic, and love. And oftentimes you'll see people marry someone they're highly desirous of. There's so much desire, but there's not really logic, or there's not a lot of that companionate love. Like there's not that proper alignment of values and compatibility. So you'll see those burning really hot for a while, but then fizzling, and then they'll separate and potentially divorce as well. So usually one of those three elements or more are missing. So people focus on the wrong things, marry the wrong person, and it's just not a compatible match.
And do you think the reason why men and women kind of trivialize relationships and kind of, like you said, that kind of latch on to whoever's desirable at the moment, the reason for that is because of birth control. And in a way, birth control has trivialized pregnancy, right? Because before, when you would get pregnant without these contraceptives, there's a chance that you could die as a woman because of of how sensitive and how pregnancy could have a lot of health issues. Now that anyone could just have an abortion or take a pill, it's kind of trivialized that whole sacred part of relationships. And maybe that's why they just latch on to anyone and then see where it goes from there.
Well, a lot of people would argue that it's the pair bonding capacity of women, right? Because if we're seeing a lot of women in comparison to the earlier times having higher numbers of sexual partners and being more open to casual sex behaviors, that the more partners a woman has, that they'll have less likelihood of creating that proper attachment, secure attachment with a partner for marriage. And there's a lot of validity to that, but it also goes for men as well. So with men, I've been talking about this a lot lately because people feel that I'm being hypocritical, but there are some biological differences between men and women, if that's
really?
a newsflash. Oh, yeah.
Wow, I never knew that.
So people have to realize that, there's different layers, right? And so the first one is the biological element, and men are biologically created in a different way. They have more of a propensity to look towards variety and to be able to procreate with as many potential women as possible. Now, socializing, throughout the different centuries, we've become different, and now it's important to see that men can have that period, usually 20s, early 30s, where they may be more promiscuous, and that can actually help them discover what's the best partner for them. but it should be a temporary stage in their development. And eventually the whole purpose should be to find somebody that you can make the mother of your children and commit to in order to progress.
So if women have more partners, their pair bonding mechanism becomes weakened and weakened over time.
Generally speaking, right? I mean, if it's really important for a woman, because there's a lot of also controversy about, can you reform after being exposed to all these dysfunctional behaviors? And absolutely, you can change. I mean, I'm in the business of change. That's why I went to school. That's why I got my PhD, so that I could help people feel that they can change as their behaviors and create a better life for themselves. Now, that does not mean that you should deny the consequences of your choices in the past. And that's the issue that we're seeing, is that a lot of people are brushing things under the rug and putting themselves in a state of denial. And that's creating a lot of dysfunctions internally, which then play out in even worse behaviors in relationships. So as long as someone is willing to admit their mistakes, admit, how things have affected them, whether it was their fault or not, and really make a concerted effort to correct that and go forward in a healthy way, then absolutely you can. So I don't want it to sound hopeless for those out there.
Right. I almost feel like there's an invisible component that's always kind of out of reach of reprimand. And I feel like when these relationships go crazy or they're toxic, murders, suicides, custody battles, all this really crazy stuff that's going on, not only in the U.S., but in Europe and Australia and other countries, Canada. I feel like parents are kind of out of reach for punishment. I feel like they should also bear the burden of raising good children. I almost feel like all these things happen and the parents are, well, your parents must have done this, but they never name them. They're never held responsible for any of this stuff. What do you think about that?
I agree. I at least feel that parents should be, by being held accountable, they should at least have to go through education and counseling support. It should be mandated. And a lot of families that I see, the children are just sort of brought in almost by their neck, figuratively. Right. And, the parents will be like, fix them. I'm going mad. Like, help me, But a lot of the times you have to reframe it and bring the parents back in and try to sort of smooth them into the idea that, okay, this is a family system issue, and maybe you need to look at how you can make some changes. And so a lot of times it's really more of a parental issue, and their behavior is the symptom of the problem. So that's what we do a lot of times in family work. So I would like to see parents being held accountable as well, but I don't want it to sound punitive. I want it to sound like it's supportive and it's educational. Right. I find a lot of parenting courses and programs that are done really well are very effective. And so we just need to have that encouragement and enforcement, really, to get them plugged into the system so that they're involuntarily doing it. They have to do it, so they better get around to it. But a lot of times I think parents are feeling extremely overwhelmed and powerless in the situation because of the way social media has affected children, and they just don't know how to control it. And maybe, they don't have a strong system in the house, like if the father is a strong sort of disciplinarian and the mother is a very sort of nurturing person, and they have a healthy parental system, then that's a much more healthy household and family that can make ground rules and guidelines and boundaries and supervise their child. But we have a lot of unhealthy homes with parent systems that are not working properly.
Actually brings me to my next question. What do you think about religious communities like the Amish, who have very low crime and very low divorce rates, that their religious frameworks should be taken account by society at large? I mean, we should take notes from them because they kind of have like this societal framework to kind of control that, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. That's always it's a resource. It's something that helps develop human behavior along like a very sort of, I don't want to say controlled and an arbitrary way, but just it's a clarified system. What's expected of you. When you don't have discipline, but you have freedom, everything sort of goes awry. Right. So it creates that structure that children need. And the way things are, it's a lack of structure that we're faced with. So you can't really force religion. You can't
right,
what do you call it? Legislate it.
Right, absolutely. But I mean, it seems like society could take notes from their societies, from their like subcultures. But I'm not particularly religious or anything, but I think it's interesting how they have very low divorce rates and very low crime.
Mm-hmm.
It's
what I think would be helpful is, if we see some more modern examples of families from those types of communities, and I don't want to pigeonhole it into one particular thing, but I know some people on Twitter that come from families like that, and you would never know that they were from a hometown that was Mormon or Amish or whatever. But they're cool. They are they're people that you want to be friends with. They dress normally. Like all the stereotypes in your mind come crumbling. What am I trying to say? Crumbling down.
There you go.
And, yes. And then you're like, oh, well, okay, it's not so weird, in that sort of myth that you have, that people that live in those communities are very sort of, I don't know, like they have a haunting feeling about them, like they're being brainwashed. Like that's the myth that we're told. But when you see a normal example of a family that's just really healthy and happy, and I think that's what mainstream North America needs to see.
Right. No, that's a really good point. Now, at the end of the day, if you take two people who like each other and they're in a relationship and it's healthy, and one was poor and one is rich, does money matter? Does money make relationships better? Or does it not really influence anything?
As in a hypothetical, like throwing money at them, giving them an opportunity?
I mean, yeah, like if does money make a difference in relationships' overall happiness?
Well, yeah, I do think it does. I don't remember who said this recently, so I don't mean to be stealing what he said, but it's money gives you freedom and freedom gives you happiness. But at the same time, I would interject and say freedom plus discipline.
Right.
So not just having blanket freedom, but you have to know how to spend that money. If you just blow that money, that's not going to give you freedom.
Right. I've heard another phrase that says, money isn't was not going to give you happiness, but it's surely not going to make you sad.
That's true as well. But a lot of the problems that you see with couples, even whether they're married or not, have to do with money.
Right.
Whether it's finances, and household chores is another one, which is really gender roles. So issues around gender roles, issues around finances are huge matters that need to be resolved and hopefully compatible before they settle down into marriage.
And do you think women prefer nice guys or bad boys?
Well, they want both. They want everything. They want the whole package.
Really?
And yeah, I mean, I joke, but there's so much controversy about that as well. So, I speak a lot about gender roles, and it's important for women to be aware of the unhealthy tendencies that they have to basically pursue that bad boy in order to feel passionate and alive and desired and all of that. But recognizing that, okay, if he's not a good provider, if you can't respect him, if he doesn't have that integrity and that good character that's going to make for a good father of your child, then you need to just recognize that this is a more superficial, sexual fling, and decide if you want to involve yourself in that, or if you want to find someone that has elements of both, someone that's going to stimulate your desire and you're attracted to them naturally, not just you're negotiating your attraction with things that you say that you want, but you just have that natural chemistry with them. But they're also a really good person and you respect them and you know that they would raise children with you very well.
And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but maybe family members or friends, you'll know someone like a guy or a girl and they keep picking incredibly bad people, right? Like someone that was raised in a foster care home or someone that was abused as a child, and say they'll get over that toxic relationship and it was very traumatic, and they'll go and they'll find that same person again all over again, someone else that has the same characteristics. They were in a foster care, they were abused, and they come from that really bad kind of situation, how do you get the message across to them that although that feels familiar to you, that kind of whatever that flavor you might call it is, it's wrong? How do they get, like, I guess, off of that addictive drug?
I mean, would it surprise you if I said that you can't force them to? They really have to come to terms with deciding to make some serious changes. And any therapist or any counselor, anyone who's trying to help someone, cannot force someone to do that. So just educating them is the key, is sharing information, trying to sort of reframe what they're doing in a different way and reflecting that to them so that maybe they can see it.
Because my experience is when you try to kind of educate them, or you kind of give them like a perspective, they're in denial. They're like, no, like they kind of only could see that situation as the most desirable one and no other option. And I think it's what you mentioned earlier in the show, which is these childhood traumas that they haven't resolved, and they need to.
Mm-hmm. It's the corrective experience. That's what they're looking for. We play out these unhealthy, destructive patterns in our lives over and over and over again until we learn the lessons. But ultimately, when we're in an unhealthy, immature, psychological, developmental stage, we're really looking for someone to rescue us, or really looking for that parent that wasn't there, that didn't help guide us in the right way. And so we almost look for partners to rescue us in a similar way. And so when you recognize that, I don't want any more of these experiences, I need to just parent myself and do what I wish my father or mother did for me back then for myself now.
Okay. No, it's a good point. But do you believe that people who have borderline personality disorder can recover at some point, or is it a lifelong condition?
I've had some borderline personality or persons struggling with it reach out to me and really want me to talk more about this topic, because they feel that people are really shaming them for their diagnosis. And those would be the people that I would say are more likely to recover from it.
And for those who don't know, what is borderline personality disorder?
Well, borderline personality disorder is it's personality disorders in general. The reason, or the way that they're distinguished from general clinical disorders, is that they don't come on all of a sudden. They're more of a pervasive, that's the word that they use to diagnose it. They're a pervasive behavioral pattern that has always existed since like 18, basically. They don't diagnose them until you're technically an adult. But you'll see the patterns in childhood, especially. They just don't diagnose them until they've formed their identity a little bit better. So it's a lifelong tendency to be dysfunctional. And so borderline personality is very dysfunctional in regards to relationships in particular. They will swing from, really adoring and idolizing someone to absolutely hating them. And it's not just mood swings, because people will confuse that with bipolar. It's more of a specific attachment dysfunction and unhealthy relationships, risky behavior, threatening, aggressive, volatile interactions. And they make for very dangerous parents, basically, because they're really exposing their children to a lot of upheaval and maybe not violence. I don't want to accuse them of all being violent. Do they ever commit violence
against their kids?
Well, they're definitely exposing their children to violent behaviors, because when they lash out, it's basically domestic violence. When they're yelling at the top of their lungs, they're cursing, they're maybe flailing and throwing things, and they may even be, hitting and kicking and all of that sort of stuff. And so that's domestic violence, whether they're doing it directly to the children or they're doing it in front of the children. So, and of course, if you're going to be that type of person, then I would assume that they've exposed their children to that directly too when they're parenting, because they lack that patience, they lack that ability.
I've met a few people like that, and it seems like, I'm an amateur obviously, but it seems like their parents enable that behavior and kind of even inflicted that kind of
Yeah, I know.
condition on
I've
them.
talked to a lot of men, a lot of gentlemen that have reached out, and they're just very, very much against, borderline personality disordered women because they ruined their lives or they were their mothers and they were very violent. So I have heard some extreme stories of violence, like literally taking out a gun, shooting at someone, taking out a knife. I just don't want to paint the picture that all people with borderline personality disorder are like that. There's going to be subsets of violent clinical diagnoses, and there's going to be some people that are not violent, but it can be.
Right. Okay. Are there any other topics that you want to talk about that I missed?
Well, I know I focus strongly on relationships, but I'm trained generally in mental health, marriage and family, but now I'm not functioning under my licenses anymore. I'm just working as an online coach.
Okay.
One of the reasons that I do that is because I really believe in the values that are helpful, like for a good life and knowing right from wrong. And I think that now healthcare in general, but mental health, they're very sensitive and they don't want to step on anybody's toes and tell them what to do or tell them what to think. And I feel that it's
Why
really
is that, by the way? Where does that spirit of not being straightforward with information and implementing a great program to get rid of these problems, where does that spirit come from?
Well, I can only speak for North America because I haven't had any experience or exposure to outside of North America. But for us, I would say it's heavily influenced by social dynamics and politics that are happening in the times. It's
You mean political correctness?
Yeah, you can't really separate the two. The intention is to help people, but it's really become more of an enabling. And if you can't tell a person that's coming to you for help that what they're doing is unhealthy and you're a health professional, then something is broken in the system.
It almost seems like what's wrong in these families is echoed in broader society, which doesn't allow people to actually get better.
That's right. Yes. So sometimes we do have to call people out, hold them accountable, and point them in the right direction. We can't just say, you pick a direction. Which direction would you like to go in?
Right. Yeah,
So
that's like
do you agree?
coddling people. Yeah,
It is.
absolutely.
I get a lot of flack from colleagues because they're sort of embedded and indoctrinated into that way of thinking. And they just call me conservative or something, but it's not even that. Like, I don't identify that way, but I have grown and evolved through my life and professional experiences. But I have to tell you, becoming an entrepreneur and working on your own terms is a huge life changer. You see things a lot differently when you have that freedom and you create the structures that help to propel you towards a successful life.
Right. I'm sure that when you're working in a clinical setting, there's probably guidelines that don't allow you to actually help people because of these social barriers, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, I absolutely agree with having ethics and regulations for a lot of things, but we also have to allow adults to be adults and make decisions for themselves. We are over-regulating too many things. And so I was telling the story the other day. It was funny. I just got into Facebook groups, and I had this battle with this very traditional therapist who said I was being closed-minded, but he was the one that wanted to throw me out of the group because he didn't like my opinion.
I'm always shocked by people like that who are so tolerant, but they're not tolerant of your views.
Exactly. So, you look up the word bigot, and that's exactly what it is.
It's what it is, yeah. Yeah, bigot.
I know,
people who think the word bigot means something to do with racism. It's not about racism. It's about only liking your point of view and invalidating everybody else's point of view, even if the information in there could be beneficial to you. It's kind of almost like ignorance,
That's right. Yeah, but they're in denial, so they only see it that way.
I know a lot of those.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a little bit of self benefit. Like, it's kind of a feedback loop.
Right.
And it just causes...
It's almost like a self-coddling system.
Exactly. I think you're right. it's to me, it's just treating adults like they're children. You have to sort of tiptoe around them, don't talk to them straight, and not giving them the authority to make decisions for themselves. And I think that's very patronizing. Yeah. And a lot of people agree that some therapists that are like, not all therapists are like that, but there's a big group, a big number of therapists that are very, very much like that. So
yeah, people have made the argument that coddling children or doing this kind of stuff is abusive in many ways, because if you don't talk to them like adults and start training them to be adults and think like adults, when they become adults, they won't know what it is to be an adult, and they're kind of like in this infantile mindset for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to allow them to take a certain level of risk. Whether it's and it's not about putting them in harm's way, but the little things, they really do help to teach them cause and effect, and you hold them accountable for the consequences of their behaviors. So it is important to make sure that you're creating rules that you're enforcing, right? So that it's not like they can just get away with anything and then they don't learn the lesson. So you have to create rules that you will enforce, and not just have some lofty, theoretical rules and then never implement them.
And what do you say about? Because it's really interesting what you said earlier about the test. If you had like some traumatic event, you're more likely to get a disease or have personality issues. What about those kids who grew up in very wealthy families, where the reverse was true, where they got coddled a lot, and some of them commit crimes or get addicted to drugs? What is their Achilles heel?
Yeah, I would say they have more of that freedom without the structure. And just to bring that back in, right? So they're more spoiled, so they are acting like immature adolescent types. They rebel, they escape. They don't really need to work for things, so they don't understand responsibility. And those are the things that the hard work ethic, integrity, being honest, all of those characteristics, they're not really, we don't draw them out in normal society anymore. It's I don't know what it is. If everything is just transparent and anything goes, people are just not really holding on to these types of family values or morals and standards, which, like you said, comes from that close-knit sort of community environment, whether it's your family, your religion, your church, your neighborhood, or something like that. So globalization has a lot of negative effects, but that's kind of what money does, right? It gives you so many options that you're not really focusing on what's important. Anyway, that's kind of how I see it. But it's pervasive across issues. People in general, they're aging, but they're not maturing. So people might be 25, 30, and they still have no clue what they stand for. They're basically just regurgitating whatever's on the news, but they haven't taken the time. We don't have any sort of rites of passage anymore. They're not really digging deep and reflecting on what matters to them and what they want to stand for in life and fight for ultimately.
Yeah, it almost seems like we live in a society, again, it just seems that way, where everyone's a victim, or everyone's special in a very strange way. And it almost seems like that's kind of the society we're living in now, where everyone's like a victim of some sort of an abuse or something like that.
Yeah, everything is being termed trauma. People are definitely feeling like they're victimized over little things, as well as, and then that basically puts the people who are experiencing real, genuine traumas in harm's way and feeling like they can't say anything because it's so watered down at this point. So it's really doing a disservice for the times when it does matter, and we do need to go in there and protect people. And I'm a trauma recovery specialist, and I've worked with groups of women for, literally I worked in an agency that only worked with sexual trauma survivors for 3 years, and then that's what my dissertation was on. And then I continued to work in that population. And these women, we talked about the Me Too movement when it first sort of came to my last jurisdiction in the Cayman Islands. And you would be surprised, in a group of sexually assaulted and abused women, they did not like the Me Too movement because it trivialized what they actually went through. Because
It's a whole
they started
victimization thing where it's trendy now.
Exactly. Some of the statements that they read on Facebook were very minor, petty
like
things.
A catcall or something.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to say that person didn't have a right to be offended by that, but that was the focus. And then they were just flooded with all of these women's stories. And then they felt pressure, like they had to do it.
Right.
And they're like, I don't want to announce to the world that I had this happen to me. I'm very happy keeping it personal and working on it in a way that's healthy in therapy. And so it had this weird effect on people who had real trauma, like, I don't want to say real, but you know what I mean?
No,
like real intense and severe traumas. And I think a lot of those women never even thought about the effects that would have on people who endured severe gang rapes and, major family abuse.
They're not interested in... They're interested in being victims. I mean, when you have like an idea like it's really cool to be a victim, I want to be a victim. How do I become a victim? Let's look to my life and see where I might possibly been a victim. I found it, and now I'm going to put this on like a jacket and yell to the world that I'm a victim, and it affects people who've actually been victims. So
I would even say that they may not talk to themselves in that way, but they would definitely be defensive about taking responsibility for the situation that they found themselves in. The amount of times I have to talk to women about, okay, so you were catcalled or whatever, or someone at the office said something to you that you felt was sexualized, but you have a shirt that exposes almost your nipples and a skirt that is, up your thigh, and you don't expect someone to look at you like you're sexy?
Yeah, I haven't worked in an office in a long time, but when I did, it was kind of like what you just mentioned. Now it seems like it's like I'm going to a club or a party, and there's a lot of attempts of like, hey, how's it going, and this indirect kind of like flirting, and because I did not take part in that, some of them were even offended that I wasn't interested in that kind of stuff, and I was just really there to work, and so.
That is the interesting cognitive dissonance, right? That you see. It's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because women want to be desired. Right. They just want to be able to control it.
Exactly. That's a good
and
point.
So I don't say that, it's you're asking for it. I'm not saying you're asking for that, but what I tell women is that if you're going to choose to if you're going to have the freedom to wear whatever you want and it's going to be sexy, you better have the skills to turn down, shut down, and block the reactions you're going to get.
Right. Like, for example, no one has a right to rob me. Okay, that's in the laws. There's no excuse for that. But I could walk to a very disenfranchised part of the country, like a really poor neighborhood, with a bag of diamonds in a Ziploc bag. Right? And no one technically has a right to rob me, but the chances of someone robbing me are probably high. And that's something that
Absolutely.
A lot of people do not want to come to terms with. They want to say that's the same thing you just said earlier. Like, what you think we're asking for it, and it's not. It's a lot more complex than that. So.
I'm always the one woman at these conferences, and since I'm a victims advocate, I'm always in these trainings, and they do these weird exercises, which I think they're really cool exercises. I just don't like the moderators, the facilitators. So they'll have the whole group of people, let's say there's 50 people, stand at the front of the room, and they say, here's a statement. She asked for it. Here's a scenario. She asked for it. Agree or disagree. Stand on this side if you agree.
Wow.
Stand on that side if you disagree.
Like social
and
engineering.
It'll be me. Oh, yeah. It'll be me and like 3 men on this side. And then they're like, well, you better defend why you're standing on that side of the room. And so they're shaming us for our opinion. And then we say our opinion, which is totally logical. And then they will just berate you for being a victim shamer and all that sort of stuff.
Especially because you claim membership in the female. So.
Right. I must have internalized misogyny or something.
Right. You must be a female hater somehow.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a very strange thing as a man. Like I said, I haven't been in office for a while, but when I did work, I felt uncomfortable. I almost felt pressured to find someone desirable, and hopefully there won't be anything wrong about it. But for the most part, I just put my sunglasses on, my earphones, and I would. And I'm a software engineer by trade, and so I just code all day, and I wouldn't,
Right.
And but yeah, you definitely have females trying to approach me, get my attention, and I did not give them attention,
Hmm.
and they were pretty angry, and so.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I believe it. I've seen that too. Now, just to clarify, I didn't say that I thought that she asked for it. I stood in the middle of the room, which was kind of like maybe or
Right.
neutral zone. But I do a lot of work with sexual harassment. I do trainings for big
Right, and just
companies.
to say, I
And
don't think anybody ever
mhm,
thinks that someone's asking for it, but I think that's a false option. It's not that you're actually asking for it, but that you're putting yourself in a situation that even though you're not asking for it, it's going to be forced upon you. So I think it's kind of like a false option that they put you in so they could demonize you. So there you go.
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's more about protection and prevention than anything. And each of us taking responsibility to avoid all of these horrible things from happening to us. Now, someone can bust into your house and assault you in the middle of the night totally randomly, right? And you have no responsibility for
Right.
that. I mean, unless you like left your door unlocked, you had your windows open and you were walking around naked, you might say, "Oh God, I can't believe I did that. Maybe I need to lock my doors, put a
They're
burglar
called
alarm system
precautions. Yeah.
in." Right, exactly. So it's the same mentality of just how can you try your best to keep yourself safe. And if you decide to, go out by yourself at 2 o'clock in the morning and walk down the street, then, one, you may want to cover up, but two, if something happens to you, you're gonna still call the police and get them arrested, but you're going to say, maybe I shouldn't have gone out at 2 a.m. and walked down the street by myself.
Right. I mean, here in San Francisco, people break into cars all the time. It's a really big problem. And we're told to take our valuables out of sight from the window. And, if I leave it there and someone breaks in and takes it from me, it's not that I was asking for it per se, but I wasn't being precautious. And I put myself in a situation where there was a risk of that. And I feel that people should understand that. It has nothing to do whether you're a female or a male, whether it's about desirability or money or value. It has nothing to do with that. It's just a logical construct that is universal and relevant in any situation where there's risk and valuables to be lost.
Right. So we live in such a litigious society, basically, this time that we live in, that people are so afraid. They're so afraid of getting into trouble that they're erring on the side of
Right.
avoidance. They're erring on the side of deflecting responsibility and accountability. And so it's really doing us a disservice because human beings they're not responsible. They're not, functioning properly to their potential. And so and we don't even have like healthy authorities necessarily to supervise that. So it's a really messed up system. And I'm trying to do my part to help people if they're
Right.
willing. So I don't target clients that I'm not trying to change
Right.
anybody's mind. I basically just say what I have to say and stand on the soapboxes that I do. And whoever hears it or
They're
sees
already
it
looking for it.
and
Right.
yeah, they're resonating with it on some level and they're questioning and then they seek me out. That's the beauty of social media. We talk a lot about the bad things, but there's a lot of good things as well. And so now instead of being very passive in my career, I mean I'm able to basically do what matters to me, and then the clients are just coming to me. I'm attracting them because of what I stand for. And so to me that makes it much more effective work because not only do they know what they're getting into, because usually people will just end up in a therapist's office that they have no clue who they are. The therapist never shares their values. They're just sort of regurgitating
Right.
book information to them. And so then they're leaving the office and thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that person does this or that or whatever in their mind maybe, but they're never actually sharing their real genuine thoughts of what they're doing and not directing them to correct the things that they're doing wrong that are leading them down an unhealthy road. So to me it's much better work. to have voluntary people that are pretty high functioning and choosing to make those changes for themselves.
And where can people find out more about your services?
My website is drtaylorburrowes.com. So it's ES, which people get confused sometimes. And Twitter is a great way to reach out to me. It's at Taylor Burrowes, or Instagram, or they can find me on Facebook as well. It's all basically the same handle, at Taylor Burrowes.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on the show, Dr. Burrowes.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Me too. Thank you. Bye.